May I have your attention, please? Shabbat Shalom, everyone. My name is Son of Yisrael, Yeshaya Hawkins, and I'd like to serve you forever as a priest starting very soon. It's now time to start finding your seats for Sabbath services.
Shabbat Shalom, everyone. My name is Son of Yisrael, Obadiah Hawkins, and I'd like to serve you forever as a priest starting very soon. It's a privilege and honor to present to you the sons and daughters of Israel now entering the sanctuary. I now present one of the sons of Israel, Obadiah Hawkins.
Shabbat Shalom, everyone. You may be seated. May the peace of Yahweh be with each and every one of you. Ooh, this is tiny. Today my title is The House of Yahweh and the Internet. The House of Yahweh was established in the last days, just like it was prophesied in Micaiah 4:1 and in Isaiah 2:2. It was established in the chief of all nations. There is no other nation that is the chief of all nations, and there is no other two brothers that are the two witnesses. In the 2017 calendar, right here it says, the internet, at least as a concept, was invented nearly a century ago by a Belgian information expert named Paul Otlet, imagining their telephone and television. Maybe someday ago, in 1934, Paul Otlet realized that the wires and radio waves connecting the world could be used for more than chatter and entertainment, but also to bring the world's knowledge into any home. And Paul Otlet and look at the day that he died. December 10th, or 1210, and Paul Otlet was interested in the radio waves, and look at the wave, same date, December 10th, or 1210. Then 1210 means gathering. Now please turn to Daniel 12. Daniel 12 in verse 4, and it says, on page 684, and it says, "But you, O Daniel, shut up the words and seal the books until the time of the end. Many will run to and fro, and knowledge will be increased." Notice, knowledge will be increased in these last days. The internet, the computer, and the bomb is just a small part of the knowledge being increased. But even Yahweh's knowledge was being increased whenever Pastor Usual Abel Hawkins, the witness, was born. And he is teaching us through the source of all knowledge called the Book of Yahweh. Woo! Book of Yahweh, praise Yahweh. In the 12th book of Yisrael, part 2, chapter 14 and verse 9, it says, here in Micaiah, he shows the establishment of the house of Yahweh, the same as Zechariah does, and he is showing that his laws of Yahweh is going to go out to all nations in this time period when he establishes his house, when he establishes his house, when his laws will go forth to all these nations. The nations are listening to the house of Yahweh right now. Even as I speak, it's going out to all nations through the internet and the television. And and all nations can hear the last day's witness, like on the sea of glass. Now, the internet in gematria is 8/28. Pastor's birthday, August 28th, and 8/28, means I will make prominent these sprinkled. And prominent, one of the meanings of prominent is conspicuous. Conspicuous. And one of the meanings of conspicuous is, I don't know if y'all can see that, crystal clear. And yes, it is being made conspicuous. It's being made crystal clear so all the nations can understand. And also, if you tell a vision in gematria, it's 8/28. Ain't that a coincidence? Isn't it being crystal clear to y'all now, saints of Yahweh? We can never reach all the nations without the computer or the internet or the television. And with that, if you'll all please stand.
It's a privilege and honor to turn over to our first speaker, son of Israel Abel, Deacon White Buffalo Hawkins.
Shabbat Shalom, everyone. You may be seated. May the peace of Yahweh be with each and every one of you. Today, since we are close to this date, I would like to speak on the internal fitness for April 10th, which is Yeshua's memorial, and what we have to do to get ready. Please turn for our first scripture to 1 Corinthians 5 and verse 7. First Corinthians 5 and verse 7. It says, "Therefore purge out the old leaven, that you may be a new batch, since you are unleavened. For truly Yeshua our Passover was sacrificed for us." Verse 8 says, "Therefore let us keep the feast, not with old leaven, neither with the leaven of malice and wickedness, but with the unleavened bread of sincerity and truth." Yeshua and the apostles knew and taught that one must purge and cleanse himself thoroughly of sin, bitterness, and hatred. Also, Yahshua spoke about how if we have a problem with our brother, we should solve that problem first before we even give our tithes and offerings. One must repent of all kinds of sin before even coming to Yahweh's presence before his Passover. Since we're going to be looking at the word purge in a lot of scriptures that has to do with Yahshua's memorial, the word purge means to make clean or pure. Please turn over to Hebrews chapter 9 and verse 14. Hebrews chapter 9 and verse 14 on page 948. It says, "How much more will the blood of the Messiah, who through the eternal Spirit offered himself without spot to Yahweh, purge your conscience from dead works to serve the living Father." Also, please turn over to 2 Timothy 2. 2 Timothy 2 and verse 21. It says, "Therefore, if a man purges himself of sin, cleanses himself from sin, and puts away all the sin, he will be a vessel for honor." Okay, honor. "Sanctified and fit for the Father's use, and prepared for every righteous work." So if we put away all the sin, if we purge ourselves, then Yahweh is able to use us. We'll be a vessel of honor. Remember the leaven of sin also that's spoken about in these scriptures, okay? The whole purpose of the Feast of Unleavened Bread. The leaven of sin that we have to purge from us. Yahshua's disciples were sanctifying and purifying themselves spiritually and physically to keep the Passover. But we have to remember what Yahshua's memorial was for. Okay, Yahshua's memorial is not a random day that we celebrate. Over 2,000 years ago, on that night, Yahshua died. And Yahshua knew he would be killed. Okay, so he lived all his life knowing that he would be killed. How would you feel if there was a prophecy? What would you think if there was a prophecy that said that you must die so someone can have the opportunity to inherit Yahweh's kingdom? Okay? Would you say, "Oh yeah, I'm going to die"? No. Would you be willing? Would you be willing to allow your life to pass away, sacrifice yourself so someone would be able to inherit the kingdom? This is what Yahshua did for us, and he knew this all of his life. In Yochanan 12. Yochanan 12 and verse 7. Yochanan 12 verse 7, Yahshua said, "Let her alone. She has kept this for the day of my burial." And we also have to remember the faithful and diligent women who helped spread the message of Yahshua. Yahshua also showed us servitude. He showed us servitude. He taught us servitude on that night. Okay, taught us to keep Yahweh's laws and serve others. Remember the servitude that Yahshua taught us. Not only with the washing of the feet, but also with the fact that he lived a life without sin. So he could be the sacrifice and make atonement for us. So we can have an opportunity to inherit Yahweh's kingdom. He served us as a Passover lamb that night. And without him, we would not have hope of our sins being forgiven, because he is our redemption. Please turn over to Hebrews, and we can see a lot of scriptures in Hebrews about Yahshua. Hebrews chapter 5 and verses 8 through 9. On page 945, it says, "Though he was a son, yet he learned obedience from the things which he suffered. Then being perfected, he became the causer of eternal salvation to all those who obey him." So Yahshua could see the importance of obedience to Yahweh's laws with the things that he suffered that night. He's the cause of eternal salvation to all those who obey Yahweh's laws. In Hebrews 10 and verses 12 to 18. It says, "But this man, after he had offered one sacrifice for sins forever, sat down at the right hand of Yahweh. From that time on, waiting until his enemies are made his footstool. For by one offering he has perfected forever those who are sanctified. And the Holy Spirit also testifies to us. For after he had first said, 'This is the covenant that I will renew with them after those days,' says Yahweh. 'I will put my laws into their hearts, and in their minds I will write them.' Then he says, 'Their sins and iniquities I will remember no more.'" Once we can learn and practice his laws. Now when there is remission of these, there is no longer an offering for sin. Remember in chapter 10, verse 3, it says, "But in those sacrifices as a remembrance, a reminder of sins every year." So when they sacrifice the bulls and the goats and those things, those are a reminder. Okay, a reminder that sin brings death. Hebrews 10 verse 10 says, "And by that will we are sanctified through the offering of the body of Yahshua Messiah once and for all." Most of all, we've been taught that when we sin, when we commit a sin, we are guilty of the murder of Yahshua. So every time that we commit a sin, just remember that, because we have to purge the sin. The Feast of Unleavened Bread pictures willingness. Willingness to put sin out of our lives. Remember the leaven of sin that we have to cleanse. The death penalty for sin passes over us once we can learn to put sin out of our lives. Please turn to Romans 2. Romans 2 and verse 13. "For not the hearers of the law are the righteous in the sight of Yahweh, but the doers of the law are the righteous." So it's not just hearing, it's practicing. We have to do all we can to prepare both physically and spiritually, getting the leavening out, internal fitness. We have to prepare. I recommend that we study these books that Pastor goes into great detail about this day. The Sabbath, this book, the Sabbath, every question answered. Yahweh's Passover and Yahshua's Memorial. And this book, The Blood and Body of Messiah. For my closing scripture, please turn over to Hebrews 12 and verse 2. Hebrews 12 and verse 2. This is what we have to do. We have to follow Yahshua's example and endure. Looking to Yahshua, the first who was led and perfected by the faith, who for the joy that was set before him endured the sacrifice, despising the shame, the Baals and the Lords, and is set down at the right hand of the throne of Yahweh. He will inherit the kingdom of Yahweh. With that, I'd like to turn it over to the next speaker, Great Deacon Buffalo Bill Hawkins.
Shabbat Shalom, everyone. You may be seated. May the peace of Yahweh be with each and every one of you. Today I'm going to be talking about this comet, it says here, no joke, comet will be historically close to the Earth on April 1. On April Fool's Day, the comet 41P Tuttle Giacobini Crescent will be at its closest to Earth since its discovery in 1858. Now, This comet will make the closest pass to Earth on record. It will be seen on 4/1/17 at 9 o'clock p.m. Eastern Time. The number 4117 in Strong's Hebrew means through the idea of readiness in assent to bargain for a wife, i.e., or wed endo, from 4116, which means to hurry, make haste, hastily make ready, quickly prepare quickly, and bring quickly, like the preparation that the great Deacon White Buffalo is talking about. This seems to denote hastily and hurriedly making ready the Passover. 4117 in Strong's Greek means broided hair that is woven, plaited, or twisted together. From 4120, it means to twine or brave, plait, weave together. This seems to denote unity. This comet was discovered in 1858. 1858 means to keep a feast day, celebrate a feast. It's used only in one time, and that's in 1 Corinthians 5:8, where it says, "Therefore let us keep a feast, not with old leaven." That's the same. 1858 in Strong's Hebrew means mother of pearl, alabaster, white. From 1865, it means liberty, freedom, a flowing spontaneity of outflow, and so clear, pure. This comet is making its appearance exactly 7 weeks from the last comet, named 45P on 2117. 21 is in Strong's Hebrew means region of gold and characteristic of fine gold. This comet was announced on 3/31/17, exactly 4 years to the day that the gold cloud appeared during the gold feast of Passover in 2013 with the word ruby, which means submission to the laws of Yahweh, written over the cloud. The gold cloud appeared at 2:10 in the afternoon. Strong's Hebrew 2:10 is from 2:11 and means characteristic of fine gold. Amazingly, Strong's Hebrew 2:11 is the same word used in Genesis 2:11, which talks about gold. Comet 41P is making its appearance exactly 20 years to the day that Comet Hale-Bopp was at its point closest to the sun on April 1st, 1997. Hale-Bopp was discovered in 1995. It was first seen by the naked eye in May of 1996 and seen throughout 1996. It's made its closest approach to Earth on March 22nd, 1997, 3/22. Also last year on 3/22, Comet P 2016 BA14 passed closer to the Earth than any other comet in 246 years. Finally, Strong's Hebrew number 41 means, "My Father is noble, Father of generosity." Strong's Greek 41 means holy. It's from number 40 and means holy, holy ones, saints, and holies of holies. And with that, I'd like to turn it over to the great Khan Shalom.
Shabbat Shalom. You may be seated. May the peace of Yahweh be with each and every one of you. We're going to cover, it's amazing how all these sermons today are fitting right together as we are in our great preparation for Yeshua's memorial, the renewing of our vow at baptism, here, our betrothal vow to be this bride of Yeshua, here, this perfect, sinless bride. And all these are tying in together as we prepare for this, as well as an event that we're going to talk about today that first occurred when Comet Hale-Bopp was first seen back during the Jubilee year of 1995 to 96, here, that we're going to bring to perfection here this feast. But turn over to Revelation 3:13, if you will. Revelation 3:13, and this is spoken here to the Malach of the House of Yahweh in Philadelphia, the Philadelphia group, the group that's the associate of the brother from the womb and the brotherly love. Here, this is what was spoken. It says in verse 13, "He who has an ear." And looks like from most of you got two of them, and we're going to talk about that today here. But if you got at least one, we can get this taken care of here, this feast. "He who has an ear, let him hear what the Spirit says to the called out ones of the house of Yahweh." Now that "hear" doesn't mean just in one ear and out the other, okay? As is so common in today's world and the way we were trained, most things go in one ear and out the other. But it means to hear intelligently, with attention and obedience. Hearing carefully, with understanding. It means the witness, hearing the witness. It means call and gather together, and Yahweh is, remember this great gathering that's taking place. We are the start of this great gathering. Because the teachers are being gathered first and trained, and then all the rest will be joined in later. It also means give ear. And yes, we must give our ear this feast if we fall into the situation here, if we qualify for this situation we're going to read about here. But it says what the Spirit says. Now this isn't Casper talking in your ear here. This is the witness speaking to you from the pulpit, through the writings here, and what the law says to the called out ones. Now remember, and the great Deacon White Buffalo brought it out too, not the hearers of the law are justified, but the what? The doers. And Jacob himself, the apostle Jacob, right? Don't be just a hearer, but be a doer. And don't be a forgetful hearer of the word. Here, forgetting it like a man that looks in the mirror and forgets what he looks like, or forgets what he's here for. What did I come here for? I don't know. What are you doing at the house of Yahweh? Well, we're seeking an eternal kingdom here that's never going to end, that's going to do away with all the suffering, the sickness, the diseases, all the hurt, the pain, the hatred that we see rampant in this world today. This kingdom is going to do away with it. But let's hear what the law says here. Let's turn to Exodus 21. And please, I'm serious when I say about giving our attention to this. Please take notes. You should have already been bringing a notebook in your Book of Yahweh and jotting these things down, even if it's just the scriptures. If you can't write fast, just put the scriptures down. We may not have time to read all the scriptures today, but please write them down and get these in your mind through your studies as you prepare for this great feast. Yes, the biggest part of the preparation should be our internal fitness, getting our minds ready to do what this feast represents, which is this sinless body that we're trying to create, that Yahweh's trying to create in us. That's what the body and blood, it's not just about eating bread and drinking wine. And that's why we only get a small little piece and a small little sip. It's because that's not what it's about. It's to show us, yes, and we must partake of that, absolutely. But that's not the main point. Because you can have unleavened bread and have wine, it's out there in abundance. But that's not the point. It's to get our minds into this perfect, sinless life that Yeshua led, getting all sin, everything out of our lives that conflicts with Yahweh. But in Exodus 21:2, it says, and remember, Yahweh himself keeps his own laws. So even though these laws are written dealing between a man and another man, and I don't mean a man in the work of Yahweh or the man of Yahweh, I'm talking about just two men here, or two families and so on. But remember, Yahweh's keeping his own laws here, and so this is pertaining to the forming of his kingdom. But if you buy a Hebrew slave, now why would Yahweh need to buy a slave? Okay, turn over real quick here, and we're gonna continue through this, but turn over here to 1 Corinthians 6. 1 Corinthians 6, because Yahweh bought us. Okay? And in 1 Corinthians 6, and in verse 19, he says, "Do you not know that your body is the sanctuary of the Holy Spirit, that is the law in you, that's developing this perfect character, this perfect attitude that Yahweh's trying to see if we qualify for the kingdom?" Because that's the main number one thing we're qualifying for here, is to see if we have this character. We'll develop the character and the attitude, the same attitude Yeshua developed. And we have this in us, of course, through the preaching and the teaching and the studying, and then through the laying on of hands at baptism, which you have from Yahweh, and you are not your own. I know the world wants to teach you you're free, white, and 21. You can do whatever you want. But when Yahweh buys us and we allow ourselves to be bought by Yahweh, we are not our own. For you were bought with a price. We'll see what that price is here shortly. But remember, why did he have to buy us? Turn back over to Romans 7. Romans 7:14, he says, "For we know that the law is spiritual, the law is spirit, but I was carnal, and we all were carnal, sold into the power of sin." Because the first time we committed sin, he who sins belongs to who? Satan. We belong to Satan. So Yahweh bought us back. Okay? So if you buy a Hebrew slave, he may serve you for 6 years. But in the 7th year, he shall go out free without paying anything. Now that is going out free here. We'll get into that more. But, think about this. If you go out free from Yahweh, where are you going? Right back to Satan. What's the point? Why did you come here then? To be joined to Yahweh and then go right back to Satan. Doesn't make a whole lot of sense. When you're dealing with Yahweh here, Yahweh's kingdom is forever. If it's not forever, we don't want it, right? If he comes alone, he is to go free alone. But if he has a wife when he comes, she is to go out with him. Now this is, not pertaining to the house of Yahweh, because no one has to ever leave the house of Yahweh. And no one can force you to leave the house of Yahweh. No one forced you to come here. No one's going to force you to stay. And no one's going to force you to leave either. Okay? This is all voluntary. But let's jump down here to verse 5. "But if the servant plainly says, 'I love my owner,' all right, my wife and my children, I will not go out free, then his owner shall bring him to the judges," that is the priests and priestesses, the Kohans and the Kohanas, and even those in training. "He shall take him to the door or the doorpost." The door of where? The house of Yahweh. "To a doorpost at the house of Yahweh, and pierce his ear through with an awl. Then he will be his servant for all eternity." Because that's our goal. We don't want to cease at any point in time of serving Yahweh. But we were sold into sin, and we belong to Satan, and Yahweh keeps his own laws. So he bought us with a price, and that price was Yeshua. Turn over to Revelation 5:9. And this is what we're going to be celebrating here, Yeshua's memorial, this night before he laid this and paid this sacrifice, paying the death penalty for us and buying us back to Yahweh if we will be obedient. Because that's one of the other meanings of the word hear. Hear with obedience. He says, and they sang a new song and so forth. Jump down here. He said, well, you are worthy to take the scroll. Let's read that, because this is talking to Yeshua, and to open its seals, which he has in these last days. For you were slain and have redeemed us, that is, bought us back to Yahweh by your blood, out of every tribe, language, and people and nation. And remember, all the tribes and languages are all mixed together, and all are containing that genetics of the 12 tribes. It's scattered throughout the whole earth at this time. And then in 2 Kepha 2:1, he talks about the false prophets, but he says, even denying the Redeemer who bought them. That's just more proof that we were bought by Yeshua. Now, at what point were we bought by Yeshua? Turn over to Romans 6. And we'll see at what point that we were bought by Yeshua was at baptism. Romans 6 and verse 3. Or are you ignorant of the fact that as many of us were baptized into Yeshua Messiah, were baptized into his death? And jump down at verse 6. For we know this, that our old self was sacrificed with him, so that that body of sin might be destroyed, and that from now on we would not serve sin. So it's at baptism that we start serving Yahweh and stop serving sin. And then after 6 years is when, and that's why we have to be baptized for 6 years in order to get your ear auled at the doorpost. And if the first time you got your ear auled, and you might need to think back, but you can do it again, you weren't baptized for 6 years yet. If you've been baptized for 6 years this feast, then you can do it again. So if you'll write down for yourself, Passover of 2011. If you were baptized at Passover 2011, then at this Passover, when we do the ceremony, you'll have been baptized for 6 years. Okay, and you can get your ear auled. Or if you're not sure if the first time you did it, maybe you weren't sure if you were baptized for 6 whole years, then you can redo it. Now, if you were baptized or came to the House of Yahweh after Passover 2011, then you have to wait till you have 6 years under your belt as a baptized member, and then you can get your ear auled. So we're not going to be stopping doing this here. There'll be time for you to do it, of course. But we were all slaves, and this is such a falsehood that Satan pulls out, trying to make everybody to be free. She leaves out the part, well, you're free from the law. But you're not free from her or her gods if you commit sin. You belong to them. You belong to them. Let's look at that in 1 Yochanan here. 1 Yochanan 3. And think about this. When, we come here to be baptized, to belong to Yahweh, he bought us. So why on earth would we go back? In 1 Yochanan 3:8, he who commits sin is of or belongs to the devil. That's not a mistranslation. That's plain English, black and white. You can read it for yourself there. He who commits sin belongs to the devil. And Yahweh's trying to get us away from the devil, because the devil does not have eternal life, only death. Now, this being a slave and servant, this is what Yeshua did. If you'll turn over to Philippians, and you think about the foot washing service that he performed, service, servant, slave, it's all the same Hebrew word. Oh, well, I'm a servant, you're a slave. No, it's all the same. Okay? And who's the greatest servant or slave of all? Yahweh. If Yahweh stopped serving his creation for a split second, we would all disappear. We wouldn't be here. We're only here because of Yahweh's continual service. And that's a fact. And we need to, and we're becoming like Yahweh, so we need to do as Yeshua did here in Philippians 2. It's in verse 5, let this mind be in you. And this is the whole point of Yeshua's memorial, which was also in Yeshua Messiah, who being in the form of Yahweh, did not think it was something to be seized upon to be equal with Yahweh, but abased himself, taking the form of a slave, made like men, being born. And he was obedient. Look at verse 8. He humbled himself. You know, really, you need to really study what it means to humble yourself and be obedient unto death. I can promise you one thing, not one of us in this room has been obedient to the point of death, because we're all alive. Okay? So we still could have a way to go here to prove to Yahweh how obedient we're going to be. All right? And keep this in mind the next time we want to get on our high horse and disagree with the house of Yahweh in some way. But it's this is how we become the sons of Yahweh. Look at Proverbs 17:2. Is by faithfully and joyfully serving Yahweh, like Solomon in Solomon's day. How the servants faithfully and joyfully, that was shown as a pattern for us. But we have the pattern of Yahweh. We have the pattern of Yeshua, who continues to serve us to this day. We just read about the opening of the seals, and he sent his Malach, who is also a perfect slave, and has served us day and night, feeding us with the message. The wise servant will have authority over a son who causes shame, and will have a share of the inheritance among the brothers. Remember, Yeshua was the firstborn of many brothers into this immediate family. And the original sons of Yahweh, they caused shame. They brought shame to their father through their disobedience and their destructive ways of war and lust and so on. But we will be wise servants, right? That's Yahweh's plan, and we will be given authority over all creation because we serve Yahweh. Now look at Galatians 4. We're going to have to skip some of these here, but and I'll give you some scriptures to study about this adoption. Let's see, Galatians 4. Yeah, Galatians 4 and verse 4. But when the appointed time had fully come, Yahweh sent forth his Son, coming into existence from a woman. He wasn't pre-existent. He came into existence from a woman. He was a son of man, coming into existence under the subjection of the law, in order that those who were under a subjection of the law might be redeemed by him, so that we might receive the adoption of sons. And because he is our Father, you are no longer a slave to sin, but a son. This is how we become sons, is by being a slave to Yahweh, not a slave to sin. Then an heir of Yahweh through Yeshua Messiah. But for your notes, mark down Romans 8, verses 15 and 23. Ephesians 1, verse 5. Let's look at Yochanan 8. Here, Yochanan 8:35. It says, he who worships, serves, obeys the gods will not remain in the house of Yahweh forever. Yahweh said when his plan is complete, there will be no gods. The gods will be gone. But a son of Yahweh, a righteous man or saint who is a servant and a being just like Yahweh, has the same character and attitude that was in Yeshua, will remain in the house of Yahweh forever. And being a son of Yahweh, through being a servant, is what makes you free. You will really be free from the gods and from sin. That's the only freedom. We never want to be free from Yahweh because that means death. Turn over to Deuteronomy 15. And this has come up in the past here. It mirrors somewhat Exodus 21, starting in verse 12. If your brother sells himself to you or is sold to you, serve you 6 years. And then in verse 13, when he's released from you, you must not let him go away empty-handed. You must supply him liberally from your flock, your threshing floor. Now that's if you were the servant, and remember, you can't be the servant of two rulers. So if you want to be a servant of a man, you can't be the servant in this fashion, and you can't be owned by Yahweh. Okay, so, and we have all chosen by baptism to belong to Yahweh, correct? All right, so, but I've had people come through the years, well, I'm ready to leave now. Where's my blessings and gifts? And I said, well, turn to Deuteronomy 28 and 15 through 68. You get a whole pile of them here. It says, cursed will you be in the city, cursed will you be in the country. And on and on and on here, because you did not serve Yahweh your Father, verse 47, joyfully and with gladness of heart in your time of great abundance. And remember, the wages of sin, Shaul wrote, is what? Death. And then in Deuteronomy 30, in verse 17, if you want to serve 6 years, and you can leave any time, brothers and sisters, if that's your heart's desire. But just remember these words. But if your heart turns away and you are not obedient and you are drawn away to submit to gods, to worship them by serving them, then I declare to you this day you will leave empty-handed. No, you'll leave empty-headed, that's for sure. But you will surely perish, and you will not prolong your days in the land which you cross over to Yarden, that land, or any other land for that matter. You will not live forever. You will die. The wages of sin is death. So do we want to leave the service of Yahweh? No way, brothers and sisters, no way. It's ridiculous. Yahweh is offering us a share in helping Him manage and take care of an ever-growing, ever-expanding universe. We'll never get to the end of it. Our jobs will never end. The joys will never end. In Yahweh Shema, there, and the beauty of it. And no pain, no suffering. Now, I want to read to you here. And remember, this was first performed here in 1995, which is on Day of Atonement, was the first time we did this in the House of Yahweh. And you know who got their ear auled first? Pastor, that's right. And he set the stage for us at the end of that 6,000 years and presented all the rest of us to Yahweh as vowing that we wanted to remain in this house forever. Let me read you the words that you're going to say here when you get this done. And I'll show you why we go through this 3 times. We go through the whole thing. And you'll be asked a question by the priest or priestess. Do you name a person's love the house of Yahweh, the family of priests who rule as Yahweh, more than all else? Now notice that. It's love the house of Yahweh. That doesn't mean you can pick or choose. Well, I just like what the food is in the cafeteria, but I don't like this administration here down at the office. I don't like that. Okay, well, I don't like what this Kahan does, or I don't like what the work crew, my supervisor. No, when you love Yahweh, the house of Yahweh, the family of priests who rule as Yahweh, you agree to obey and submit to the entire administration of the house of Yahweh, not bucking up against it. Remember, there's a difference between asking a question and calling something into question. It's a fine line. I've heard a lot of, well, I was only asking questions. You know, no, you were questioning Yahweh. Why are you doing this? Well, anyway, your answer will be, if this is truly in your heart, and remember, this is a vow to Yahweh, and rehearse what Yahweh said about these vows, but I, your name, love the house of Yahweh, the bride, the Lamb's wife, the kingdom of priests who rule as Yahweh, more than all else. I want to remain in this house forever. And I remember what Pastor told us back then. All means all. Find something that you can squeeze out of that all. There isn't anything. So at no time can you say, well, I didn't mean that. I don't go along with that. You know. Now, turn over to in our closing scripture, Yochanan 21. Because Yeshua Messiah did the same thing with his disciples here after he was resurrected and during that 40 days that he got to spend with them here. And they went out and they ate. They had a fish meal here with his disciples. Okay, and in verse 15 he says, so when they had eaten, Yeshua said to Simon Kepha, Simon, son of Yana, do you love me more than these? Now, you know, the all else is what he's saying here. Do you love me more than all else? He said to him, yes, teacher, you know I love you. He said to him, feed my lambs. Then he said to him again the second time, Simon, son of Yana, do you love me? He said to him, yes, teacher, you know that I love you. And he said to him, feed my sheep. And he said to him the third time, Simon, son of Yana, do you love me? Kepha was grieved because he had said to him the third time, do you love me? And he said to him, teacher, you know all things. You know that I love you. Yeshua said to him, feed my sheep. He said, you know, and this was the same thing that we are going to perform this feast, brethren. So get this in your minds. Get this love for the house of Yahweh firmly established in your mind, if it isn't already, because this is forever, and this is the only thing that's going to remain, is the house of Yahweh and the kingdom of Yahweh. Okay, keep that in mind, and with that, if everyone will please stand, we'll now turn the services over to the great Kohan Ilya Hawkins.
Shabbat Shalom, everyone. You may all be seated. Of course, what we see in the world today, the prophecies that come forth from our great high priest, and of course he's speaking according to the law and the prophets, and Matthew 24 speaking of these famines, and of course with famines you get disease, and also he spoke of wars. And what we're seeing today, of course, depopulation is something that you think that you'll notice when it takes place. Sometimes it's taking place right underneath our nose and it kind of escapes us because it's called something else. But yet millions and millions and millions of people are dying. Right now in Somalia, South Sudan, Nigeria, and Yemen, they are all suffering huge famines. And these famines now, they all have one thing in common, as the news reporter says, and it's conflict. These are man-made famines from war, not from drought. Yemen itself imported before the war 90% of its food. Remember, you control the food, you control the people. What is the first thing they shut off from Yemen? The armed forces shut down all imports. They've shut down their food. One of the mothers in Somalia says the hardest choice of what she has to deal with every day is choosing which child to feed, because the food is so small and so scarce, you don't have enough to help get past starvation. So you divide it up to try to keep everyone alive just long enough. But right now they're saying, think about this, half the population of Somalia is facing death due to starvation. Half the population. You're talking about taking a country and killing half the people, starving them to death. They're going to die from something that is easily preventable. If you look at the amount of money spent on war, spent on pharmaceuticals, spent on drugs itself, you could put an end to starvation today. But remember, the Vatican is in control. Everything is done according to a plan. The UN is saying right now that 20 million people are more likely to starve to death. the basic necessity of eating food, starve to death. Now they're saying they need $4.4 billion to get help by July to help put an end to these famines that are, as they say, a result of war. Now there are famines that we see in countries like Kenya that is coming from drought, and they're expecting that to spread very rapidly. Watch what they say, though, later on in the news. Remember, at $4.4 billion is what they say they need to help prevent starvation with these people. There's something else that will come up later in the news, and look at what money's being spent on. Look at the money that's coming in from it. And, of course, North Carolina, and this really bothers me being someone that was born in North Carolina, of course, they have finally given in to the repeal of the transgender law. And, of course, they were pressured by the Vatican to let these homosexuals go into whichever bathroom they want to go into. Imagine you send your son into a bathroom and here comes a woman in behind, or you send your daughter into a bathroom and here comes a man in behind because he feels he's a woman. Now imagine what that does to the mind, and imagine the danger. Imagine how much that goes against Yahweh's law of separation. At the time separation is demanded the most, the rules being passed saying you can't do it. And of course this is coming forth from the Vatican, their tentacles stuck into everything. And then notice it goes into a transgender bus, an anti-transgender bus. This man up in Boston, he has a bus, brand new bus, put on the side of it, boys are boys and girls are girls. That's science, you can't change it. Now watch very closely to what takes place. There's a man that thinks or feels he's a woman. And of course he says, after the violence and all of these things this man's enduring for standing up for this, standing up for some morality, he says that, and this is, listen carefully what he says, that the teaching and the keeping of these rules, these morals, they're toxic to the minds of transgender and queer kids. They're toxic. Well, of course, because it would teach them morality. Remember, Pastor said years ago that we have to have true grit. You cannot cower down because someone wants you to break a law, because someone wants you to bend a law. Well, remember true grit. If you remember from page 18 of the character unit, true grit, of course, is having inner grit, integrity. And that's what it is. And it means that the end result of internalizing, of course, it's inside positive character traits that can be clearly seen in your action and attitudes. That is called integrity or true grit. Well, that's what the priesthood has to have. And remember, if you don't stand up for the rules or these morals, these laws of Yahweh, you're better to have an awl through your ear, because if you don't, a sodomite religion will put a ring through your nose and they will lead you everywhere they want you to go. And are we saying that if you don't follow the rules of the house of Yahweh, you're being led by sodomites? Let's be crystal clear. If you do not follow the rules as come forth from the house of Yahweh, you follow sodomites. You are part of that sodomite religion. But very carefully, watch this man, and I'm not talking down about this man who feels that he is a woman. He hasn't been educated. He's not guilty of the things that he's doing. He's only a product of a system. But watch how confused this man is by saying the rules bring us down. We just want to feel happy and safe. And then think about what's said when people separate themselves from the house of Yahweh. It's these rules. We just want to go have fun, be happy and safe. Well, these rules are what keep us safe. And of course, this confusion is what sets in. And you should be able to empathize with this man, because it's really confusion from the teachings at its best that entered this man's mind. And then, of course, now you have the Vatican. They're crying out for the disarmament of nuclear weapons. They should, because they know they're going to burn. They hear it all the time coming from Abelin, Texas. They're going to burn with these nuclear weapons. And they've actually called, the UN also called a convention, or to convene at the UN Assembly to put forth this barring of nuclear weapons. Well, 3 countries refused to attend: the United States, the UK, and France. Now that's very important, because remember, the EU, as we'll get to in a second, is falling, and is definitely falling fast. But why it's falling, of course, civilian deaths. If you remember, in the last year, we showed it many times where the United States said they do their best to prevent civilian deaths when dropping bombs. Now they're openly, it is laughable. Now they're actually openly stating that many civilians die. There's nothing they can do about it or will try to do about it any longer, and they're blaming ISIS for it. If civilians die, it has to be ISIS's fault. It can't be ours because we're only fighting ISIS, and it's a product of the cause, so to speak. And of course, these deaths are destroying countries. They're destroying population. It's part of depopulation. And then, of course, medical marijuana. If you remember, Pastor said this years ago when they said they were going to produce this medical marijuana. He said that was a gateway to open up for recreational marijuana. Well, of course, next year, California and a few other states will be legally selling recreational marijuana. You no longer have to be sick for it or admit you're sick for it. You just go buy it, and you can get it. And, of course, it's going to be a $21 billion a year business in just 3 years. Right now, they profit $4 billion. They could actually take that money that they're investing in marijuana itself, and they could actually solve this starvation that is taking place with these people starving to death. Just a few bombs could put an end if they wanted to. And anyone with half a brain knows that if a governmental source with power wants to do something, they can get it done. If people are starving to death, it's because they want to get it done. And then, of course, last but not least, the EU, as it's being chopped so quickly from the golden altar to collapse very soon. Watch as one of the leaders of the UK, he says the ideology of the newly risen leaders, those running for president in France and a few other countries, it's causing, as Pastor said last week, it's causing the EU to collapse under its own pressure. And if you notice when Pope Francis met with the 27 countries of the EU, well, there were 28. The one that didn't attend was the UK because they've already initiated their divorce, so to speak, from the EU. And he closes out by saying, listen, it's not that the EU is in trouble. The EU is dying. It's not the question of, is it going to die? The question is, how long before it does die? And of course, with all of those things, we can see prophecy coming to pass and the words of the seventh Malach being fulfilled along with the law and the prophets. At this time, if we could please play the news.
Pay close attention. What you're about to see is Bible prophecy being fulfilled.
Welcome to another edition of YPN News, bringing you news as it relates to Bible prophecy and foretold by Yeshua Hawkins. Well, famines in the continent of Africa, the Vatican's view on nuclear weapons, and President Trump's upcoming meeting with German Chancellor Angela Merkel. But first, we're going to start off with those famines in Africa, because famines and disease is on the rise in Somalia. With the ongoing drought in the region, diseases like cholera and measles are making the situation worse. The UN is warning the world that the humanitarian situation in Somalia is a desperate one. And UN's Secretary General Antonio Guterres said the looming situation in Somalia is one that will allow terrorism to prosper, and for that reason has become a global problem everywhere.
One Somalian mother told a CNN correspondent that she fled with her children on foot. Now, with her children in tow, one crying the whole way and another exhausted. Now, even though, surprisingly, a famine hasn't been declared yet, the UN said more than 6 million people need food assistance. Now, that number is half the Somali population.
Wow, amazing. Well, the situation in Somalia is so dire, mothers have the difficult task of actually deciding which child to feed for the day. Animals and livestock are also feeling the effects of the drought and famine, while the UN estimates that 20 million people could die of starvation. Well, Fatima Hassan said that she came from a neighboring camp, and the situation there was the same. Their cows and goats died, and they didn't have food, and of course now they have nothing left.
Secretary Guterres said that there are 337,000 children that are malnourished, and that number could go up to 1 million if there is not enough support to avoid it. Now, this is the largest humanitarian crisis since 1945, according to the UN. Now, adding to Somalia, almost 19 million in Yemen, 7.5 million in South Sudan, and 7 million in northeast Nigeria. Now, more than 20 million people across 4 countries face starvation and famine, the most since the UN was started. Now, the UN says that $4.4 billion in emergency assistance is needed by July.
Interesting. Without collective and global effort, people will simply starve to death. That, according to Undersecretary General for Humanitarian Affairs and Emergency Relief for the UN, Stephen O'Brien. In South Sudan, a country ravaged by war for the last 7 years, O'Brien said that the situation is worse than it's ever been, and famine in the south, which is of Sudan, South Sudan, he said that it's man-made.
Man-made.
Yep, man-made.
Well, the situation in northeast Nigeria isn't any better, with a 7-year war by Boko Haram killing over 20,000 people and driving 2.9 million people from their homes. Now, the common link to all these situations is conflict. In addition to the breakdown of public services, the South Sudan government has been accused of withholding food relief from the people. South Sudan is Africa's newest nation and is a very oil-rich country whose creation was encouraged by the West. Now, right now, famine is considered as a weapon of war.
That's interesting that a country such as the South Sudan has such great resources, but yet the people are suffering.
Exactly.
That's amazing. Well, a little closer to home, North Carolina's controversial bathroom bill pretty much just got flushed down the toilet. This was a bill that transgender people were fighting against. Well, it was repealed. Well, this buckling came after enormous pressure from companies were leaving the state, along with a lot of other venues and businesses actually refusing to do business with that coastal state.
Because of the bill's previous passing, many transgender people felt betrayed by their local governments. Now, the law mandated that people use public bathrooms that matched the gender on their birth certificate, outraging civil rights and LGBT groups. Now, under the new law, state lawmakers can still regulate public bathrooms and prohibit local municipalities from passing non-discrimination ordinances through 2020. Now, the question on many minds is, will this new bill be enough, and will the revenue start flowing once again into the state?
Yeah, so they were really feeling the pinch financially. Interesting. A free speech bus bringing a message of gender identification rolled through Boston. Joseph Grabowski with the free speech bus said that they hope to convey a message over the debate over LGBT, transgender, and bathroom issues, a debate that he says needs to be conducted in a respectful way on both sides. Mr. Grabowski said that he hoped for a civic renewed discussion over what he sees as a rush towards something that isn't scientifically proven, referring to the LGBT and transgender issues.
Oh, Bobby Taylor with the Massachusetts Transgender Political Coalition said that he was offended by the bus's message of being pro-family, saying that this message was toxic to trans and queer kids. Now, Taylor continued by saying the fundamental problem is that they want society to behave according to their rules, and I want a society that is safe for everyone, one that reflects love, compassion, and nurturing of healthy relationships and is truly safe for everyone. And Katan, now that seems to be a lot of of opinions and confusion taking place over that issue. And amazingly, it sounds a lot like some of the comments that Pope Francis made regarding the same, transgender issues.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, seems like if we wanted safety within society, then rules must be followed. Yeah. Well, safety was also a concern at a recent UN gathering. For insight on that and several other stories, we now turn it over to Larry McGee. Larry, what exactly was on the table at the latest UN gathering?
Concerned delegates from many of the world's nations filled the UN General Assembly Hall this week over fears related to nuclear weapons. In an effort to stave off catastrophic human disaster, many of the officials were calling for a nuclear ban, as the UN's High Representative for Disarmament, Kim Wong-soo, indicated that the world's doomsday clock has been set to 2.5 minutes to midnight, signaling the worst state of international relations since 1953 in the Cold War. Fears are being elevated in the face of nuclear modernization by both the U.S. and Russia, coupled with the suggestion by each side of a possible increase in nuclear arms. Even more alarming, the nuclear states themselves have refused to participate in the disarmament talks, citing global uncertainty and threats from nations such as North Korea and Persia or Iran. Major players like Britain advocate a more gradual approach, such as that outlined in the Nuclear Proliferation Treaty, which they believe will ultimately help to create an environment where the world's nuclear powers feel more comfortable disarming. Public approval and encouragement for the recent UN Assembly was issued by the Standing Pontiff, who gave his support to the Assembly and its push to ban and eliminate nuclear weapons. The Pope's message was received with a healthy dose of skepticism by many, however, given the Vatican's long-standing policy regarding just war. Also worthy of note is the rejection of the talks by the U.S. and other quartet bedfellows. The geopolitical unit's nuncio and permanent observer to the UN in Geneva, Archbishop Silvano Tomasi, says the weapons harm innocent civilians when they are employed, and thus their use is always unacceptable. The gathering's stated purpose is to outline prohibitions and binding obligations to achieve a world without nuclear weapons. That the world is filled with wars and powder keg scenarios such as those proposed by Caspar Weinberger in his book, The Next War, is unmistakably obvious for everyone paying attention. In Yemen, the death toll is now being recorded at 8,000, half of which are believed to have been civilians. Moreover, millions of the nation's citizens are said to be in jeopardy connected to the country's humanitarian crisis, which surfaced during its recent conflicts. 7 million people in Yemen are reported to be facing famine, with additional 17 million said to be grappling with food insecurity, and 14 million are said to be without access to healthy drinking water. Food prices in the nation are also skyrocketing due to fuel shortages. The country's fuel crisis is said to be impacting not just its transportation, but also its entire infrastructure. The nation's food crisis is also being attributed to a vulnerability created by its heavy dependence on imports. Before its recent conflict, Yemen is reported to have imported 90% of its food supply. Despite recent scientific reports revealing the fact that THC causes one's immune system to go up in smoke, the trend towards marijuana legalization is increasing, with California dispensaries recording record growth in sales. Next year, California is poised to allow distribution of the popular toxin for recreational use, joining the ranks of 8 other states who have already passed comparable legislation. The move by the states unearths division in the country's union, since the federal government still maintains that the drug is illegal. It has been the expected cash cow, however. In 2016, the controversial industry brought in $6.9 billion, and that number is predicted to grow by $14 billion over the next 5 years. The cut for the local governments which have legalized use is projected to reach $3 billion, due to be collected through what is being called a tax on sin. The amount of war being collected in recent massacres, such as the slaughter in Mosul last month, is causing some to suspect that America may have relaxed its rules of engagement. The rules of engagement outline when the military can attack an enemy and when it cannot. Analysts are citing as the culprit the president's instructions to his national security team to devise a plan to confront ISIS. The memorandum stated that the plan shall include recommended changes to any United States rules of engagement and other United States policy restrictions that exceed the requirements of international law regarding the use of force against ISIS. The Pentagon is said to be playing semantics or word games concerning the matter, stating that the rules of engagement haven't changed, but it is easier to launch an airstrike. While watchdog groups such as Amnesty International report stories of entire houses being bombed with families inside, the U.S. maintains that when a judgment is made to bomb a target, there is a preference that there not be any civilian casualties. For IPN News, I'm Larry McGee. Katan Jeff, back to you.
Notice, Katan, they said a preference that no civilians be inside, but not a necessity. So, life, I guess, is expendable.
Yes.
Well, Secretary of State Rex Tillerson, with his best smile, greeted Turkey's President Recep Tayyip Erdogan as the two shook hands in front of cameras last week in Ankara. But behind closed doors, relations between the two countries are seriously stained, especially when it comes to the war on ISIS right along Turkey's border with Syria. Now, because the U.S. has very few of its own troops on the ground there, they are empowering a Kurdish fighting group called the YPG to assist them in the war against ISIS.
Now, this would be fine, except Turkey views the YPG as an enemy and terrorist group itself. Turkey's foreign minister accused the U.S. of using terrorists to fight terrorists. Turkey is adamant that the U.S. stop supporting the YPG, but Secretary Tillerson would not make that promise. In a press conference following the talks, Mr. Tillerson said, "What we discussed today were options that are available to us. They're difficult options. These are not easy decisions."
Now, the war has cost 400,000 Syrian lives alone, and triggered a global refugee crisis. Now, both Turkey and the U.S. say they want to help stop the violence that is currently affecting much of the region. As the news conference was coming to a close, Mr. Tillerson seemed to hint at a policy shift that could help. He said, quote, "I think the status and the longer-term status of President Assad will be decided by the Syrian people."
Well, from the beginning of the Syrian war, the policy of the United States government towards Syria has been that President Bashar al-Assad must go. But the Trump administration seems to be making a change to that long-standing policy. But even if the Syrian people were to hold elections with a quarter of the population having fled their war-torn country, how could they truly show who they support?
Yeah. Well, it took 9 months since the British people voted to formally notify the European Union that the country is breaking away from the institution. Now, the president of the European Union Council, Donald Tusk, was visibly upset as he made the announcement, pointing out that not all British are in agreement with the outcome. He said, "There's no reason to pretend that this is a happy day, neither in Brussels nor in London. After all, most Europeans, including almost half of the British voters, wish that we would stay together, not drift apart."
Still ahead are months of negotiations as to the conditions the UK will leave under. While Germany's chancellor has expressed her desire for the UK and EU to remain close partners, there are concerns about trade deals going on while the terms of Brexit are being sorted out.
Neither side is being too transparent as to what their positions will be in the long run. However, at the very core of the EU is its commitment to a stronger, more unified Europe. There are some who believe now more than ever unity is needed on the continent, but also change to cope with today's political climate.
Well, Sophie in 't Veld, a member of European Parliament since 2004, told Al Jazeera in an interview that the old European Union, the so-called Intergovernmental European Union, is dead. It doesn't work anymore. It's not equipped for the 21st century. So now we need to move into a political union that is equipped to respond adequately, flexibly, and quickly.
Well, Nigel Farage, the former leader of UKIP, or the United Kingdom Independence Party, and major Brexit supporter, is also a regular contributor to Fox Business News. He recently spoke with journalist Lou Dobbs concerning Angela Merkel and President Trump's upcoming first meeting, as well as how various elections in Europe will affect its future.
If President Trump expects Germany to spend more on its military, Farage was asked if he thought the U.S. and Europe were prepared for the rearmament of Germany. He responded with, Germany and, in fact, most of the EU members of NATO are not paying their way, haven't been paying their way for years. In fact, Germany is spending near a 1% of its budget on defense, not the 2% that NATO rules suggest. And I think they're going to have some very harsh talks.
Farage went on to say, my worry with all of this is that the European Union are saying to people like Germany, don't worry, spend less. Let's have a European army and ditch NATO. I do not believe this is a good thing, he said, for world peace. I think this is frankly the most important discussion that Merkel and Trump can have.
But of course, Chancellor Merkel and President Trump are not in agreement on many issues. For example, Trump has called Merkel's open door policy to all refugees a catastrophic error. This is only one issue they disagree on, and so the U.S. and German relations, which were very warm during the Obama administration, may grow somewhat cold with this new Trump administration, who Farage says looks toward the United Kingdom as a close friend and ally more so than Germany.
On the subject of upcoming elections in Europe, Nigel Farage had strong opinions on how they could affect the state of Europe. He explained how in the Netherlands, Geert Wilders, the leader of the PVV, or Party for Freedom, is leading in the polls right now. Farage told Dobbs, I don't think anyone doubts that he will win the elections in the sense that this party or his party will get the biggest number of votes and the biggest number of seats. But it's unlikely that he will be able to form a coalition government.
Now, the French election is absolutely fascinating, Farage says. Marine Le Pen of the Front National Party is the lead candidate out of about 14. There will be a runoff between the top two in May. Mr. Farage believes it's going to be Le Pen against either Francois Fillon, the former French Prime Minister, or the former Minister of Economy, Industry, and Digital Affairs, Emmanuel Macron.
If the race comes down to Macron versus Le Pen, which Farage thinks it will, he says it won't just be a battle of personalities, but a battle of ideologies. Macron supports the Euro, a United States of Europe, a European army. Le Pen believes in independence. Farage added it could be, if that's the runoff, the most important democratic election the West has seen for many, many years.
Well, finally, when asked if he thought the state of the European Union would be more shaky 6 months from now because of the elections, Farage replied, you know something? Even if Le Pen doesn't win outright, she'll win because she'll shift the center of gravity of the whole European debate in France. The European Union is dying before our very eyes. The only question is, how long will it take?
An interesting, Katan, that Yisrael Hawkins has been talking about the quartet again, and of course the European Union is one of those quartet members.
Right.
So be interesting to see would that dying take place, and really what's going to come about with the other three members.
Yeah, because right now it seems like one of the members is definitely being cut off. I wonder if many more will follow.
Yeah, we'll have to see. Well, before we turn it over to Yisrael Hawkins, we'd like to remind our viewers of a few very special events coming up at the House of Yahweh, Yeshua's Memorial and the Feast of Unleavened Bread.
Now, the Feast of Unleavened Bread is tentatively set for April 10th through 18th, so plan now to make your preparations to attend the feast at the House of Yahweh. You can contact the House of Yahweh by writing them at the House of Yahweh, P.O. Box 2498, Abelin, Texas 79604, or you can call them at 1-800-613-9494. Visit them on any of their websites at www.yahweh.com, www.yisraelhawkins.com, or www.yahwehsbranch.com. You can also visit us on our website at www.ypnnews.com. You can email the House of Yahweh at info@yahweh.com, and any calls outside the United States, please dial the number on your screen. And for those of you who enjoy studying your Holy Scriptures, don't forget the best resource to the Holy Scriptures, the Yisrael Says and the Ask Yisrael programs. You can find those by going to www.yisraelsays.com and www.askyisrael.com.
Well, don't go anywhere. Up next is another exciting message from Yisrael Hawkins. From all of us here at YPN News, I'm Jeffrey Heimerman.
And I'm Katan Alexander.
Thanks for watching.
At this time, if everyone would please stand, I would like to introduce the greatest teacher in the world, the great Kahan Yisrael, Abel Hawkins.
Shalom, everyone. Oh, this is a beautiful sight today. Wow. You too. Praise Yahweh. Yahweh. You may be seated. You know, with that news, you can see that what the prophecies say is right on the money. I want you, may the peace of Yahweh be with each and every one of you. You remember the nuclear baby. Yahweh gave us the date of September 6th, 2007. That bombing that took place on that day is back in the news. Two media's running it right now. I didn't have time to print it off, but I want to read it from this telephone if I don't push the wrong button. He recommended how in 2007 Israel's former Mossad chief, Mir Dagon, showed him pictures of Syria's Al-Kabar nuclear faculty. This is the one that got bombed, which showed coalition between North Korea and Iran. Syria is Iran's ally. The Israelis bombed that reactor and destroyed it. That faculty was near Raqqa, which is now the ISIS base. You see how all of this is tied together? Now listen closely. The ISIS base. Had that reactor stayed on, today the ISIS would have had something else to terrorize the world with. North Korea is working. They're getting a phone call here. I hope it don't shut off. North Korea is working with Iran on warheads and ballistic missiles. North Korea is working with Iran on warheads and ballistic missiles. Days after Saddam Hussein was captured, Cheney said Libya's Muammar Gaddafi turned over all of his nuclear materials and designs to the U.S. It's another matter of Gaddafi was launched by Islamic mobs later. Libya, he said, went down to Islamic groups and held Gaddafi. Gaddafi returned his nuclear programs. And I don't think I can turn this anymore. I think this is a picture. But they give the date, the very date that we gave, and showed how this ties in with all of these nations. Anyway, I told you how complicated this thing was last week, if you remember. And then the news media, then you have the comet that was brought out today and the meanings of this comet. You have the also before that, the great deacon White Buffalo's sermon. You really need to listen to this again, I think, and absorb every bit of it to see just how complicated this Vatican is in reaching all of these countries, guiding all these countries. Now, what was it occurred yesterday. Well, I can't keep up with it. Anyway, North Carolina. You got that today, the news. The North Carolina was resisting the Hamitic. Yes, this came from Ham and his sons. Canaan, his son Canaan. This came from them. Their evil, sadistic, religious actions that they were practicing from the gods. One of them, April, the foolish god, that went around doing foolishness on this day, by the way. I think that was his birth. But him or her, I don't know what he was. I don't know if he knew what he was or she knew what she was. But they wanted to run around doing foolish things on this day. They were in on it too. Esther, Easter, probably the half bunny and half man that went around laying colored eggs. These things all tie together. Carolina, North Carolina, if you remember, they bucked the system. They said, no, we're not going to play with your rules. Well, the Vatican owns the United States, and they want to pulling their businesses out of North Carolina, and these people want to losing billions of dollars. And of course, they gave in. They couldn't stand it. They were about to shut down, and they knew they were going to shut down. They were going to lose their state. Someone else is going to take over. The politicians is going to disappear out of that state. They had to give in. They had no choice. That's how strong the Vatican is with its tentacles in these different states. They're in the schools. They're in the municipality system throughout the whole world. That's what your Bible says, and I'll show you in just a moment. But get this in your mind. Losing millions, billions of dollars, so they couldn't stand the pressure. I want you to turn over to Revelation 6. You saw the hunger going on, how they've shut the food off from certain nations. They've actually shut it off. They're dependent on food, imports of food to live on. They're starving to death. Very few newspapers dare run it, but millions of people are starving to death, and they said by the time they can get the news out, it's too late. The people are dead. Where are they putting them? How are they hiding their bodies? Here in Revelation 13, I think I said Revelation 6, but in 13, we see this beastly system in full action, and it totally describes the system we're dealing with today. The complexity of this, I was talking about this last week, it's a complex system. There's no names broadcast except whoever's carrying the name of Pope, that's the mouthpiece, the Santa Claus that delivers the messages. Did you notice that Merkel met with the Pope? She is one of the 27 that met with her last week that I showed you this. I showed you the picture last week. She was one that met with him. Did you see who she's going to visit next? Trump. She's bringing a message to Trump that the Pope won't bring. He can't bring because he's afraid he'll be insulted again. So she's bringing him a message. You'll probably never know that, but that's what she's up to. The Pope, the Vatican, they reach out. They've already reached out. They've got their tools in every country. Those 10 kings are 10 instruments in the Vatican's hand that she's going to use. in Revelations 13, we see here, and I stood upon the sands of the sea, and I saw a beast rise up out of the sea. We know the sea is multitudes, nations, and tongues, as we're shown in Revelation 17:15. The sea, the waters that you saw, are multitudes, nations, and tongues. If we could get that picture in our mind with this great Vatican, the octopus that sits on 7 hills with his tentacles going out to every nation on earth, taking messages, giving instructions to the politicians, taking care of the schools and prisons all over the world. Yes, we're dealing with that too. Pretty soon the prisoners are going to go free. We'll deal with that too. But they run it all. They run every bit of this. They're not even the leading religion here in the United States, but they're running the United States. And I stood upon the sands of the sea, and I saw a beast rise up out of multitudes, nations, and tongues. We'll go into that in more detail as we get into the messages of the feast, I was going to start this week, but the news is so great here, I said I'm going to have to postpone the sermon. But next week I'll get into it, and then, Yahweh willing, and then during the feast. But having 7 heads and 10 horns, the 10 horns, you just saw those. That's right in action. It couldn't have occurred at a better time. And upon on his horns were the crowns. The crowns. If you remember the history of Joseph in Egypt, and they had this, he had this dream, the Pharaoh did, of 7 dry years and 7 plenteous years. 7 plenteous years come first, and Joseph was able to tell him this dream and all the details about it. So he put him over the whole land of Egypt. He actually put him over the whole land of Egypt. That wasn't all. He gave him his top daughter to marry, of which he had Ephraim and Manasseh. Try to absorb all of this and remember it, because it's very important in understanding the Holy Scripture. Joseph ran Egypt. He was over all that the Pharaoh had. The only thing that he wasn't over was Pharaoh himself. That's the reason when Yeshua was talking to the Pharisees, Sadducees, Essenes, and Herodians, the chief priest, he said, "Follow me, and I'll get you out of this bondage." And they said, "What do you mean? We're the children of Abraham. We've never been in bondage." "Well, what was you in Egypt?" The way the Christians painted in the King James, they were the lowest slaves with a whip and a gun over them and a chair maybe to make them do the work of building bricks. Foundations is what those people were building. They were governmental people that Joseph put in office. When Moshe came to them and says, "I'll take sickness away from you, we'll have our own land flowing with milk and honey. We won't have Pharaoh to make decisions for us. We can make them all ourselves." There's a totally different picture painted if you'll just read the scriptures and believe what they say in Genesis. And then the next step is bringing them out of that sin. And Yeshua told them the bondage of sin. He who serves sin is a slave to sin. That was the bondage you had over you in Egypt. Now, if you got that straight, then today you can see Yada, with a lot of changes made, of course. But Yada sits on 7 hills. Yada is this great, magnificently complicated kingdom whose hand is on the neck of all of his enemies and what he considers his enemies, what they consider their enemies. They have a way of digging into those enemies. And you'll see this day after day in this government if you'll just watch the news. The same thing is shown in your scriptures. From Genesis, clear through the book of Revelations, and the ending of this system of Yada. The chopping off of the horns of the beast, the four beasts. Well, he wrote, this beastly system now rises up among multitudes, nations, and languages, having the 7 heads and 10 horns. 7 heads are described as 7 mountains on which this beast sits, that he saw rising up among the multitudes. And all of them have the names of blasphemy. You see that? The last 3 words in that verse 1? The names of blasphemy. That's what Daniel saw now. Daniel saw the same thing. It was described in Genesis by Jacob, actually described in detail prophecy for us for the last days. And to me, this is the greatest thing, to know and to see these prophecies and see how they have all come to pass one by one by one. I woke up at 4 o'clock this morning and set your clock forward an hour, and that makes it 3 o'clock. I woke up and I was so rejoicing. I could hardly wait to get to the sanctuary, but I laid there and rested for a while. But I couldn't shut it off. I kept thinking of these prophecies, and what a magnificent thing it is to be able to understand this, because it's closed to the whole world. And Yahweh has chosen his house to reveal these things, actually reveal what's in black and white. It's actually printed right in front of the enemy's eyes, but of course they can't figure it out because it's here a little and there a little, and Yahweh has to guide you, make certain things important in your mind, inspire you to look at this or that, speak to you if you will, and from that, going into your minds and hearts, he has pulled out from the nations, you people right here, this small group of people right here, and said, you're going to be the finishing touch on this kingdom. You're the ones that's going to bring back to life all the ones that prove themselves, but they without you won't make it. That's what he promises us. Well, the beast which I saw was similar to a leopard, and then he describes it being mean and ornery like he did Yada in Genesis 49. And the dragon, the last 2 lines, the dragon gave him his power. Where did his power come from? Where's the Vatican's power coming from? They don't worship Yahweh. They worship Satan, the evil like the gods. They're as evil as Ephraim and Manasseh were. They're as evil as Satan herself. They practice this. And of course, they devour their enemies. Dragon gave him his power, his throne, and his great authority. I saw one of the heads wounded. That wound took place. The Book of Yahweh got out and got back to the people finally in 1987 due to that wound that took place. Verse 4, and they worshiped the dragon. They didn't worship Yahweh like Cain, Adam, and Eve. They worshiped Satan. They were evil like the gods. How do you worship Satan? The great Kohan Shaul just brought it out. You worship Satan by not attending Sabbath. Yes, that's a worship of Satan. He had to go hunting Adam and Eve. Yahweh sent Abel to go hunt them. Where you been? Why aren't you at services? Well, it's worshiping Satan, missing the commands. Worship means serve in both Book 1 and Book 2. That's described in detail in Deuteronomy 30, verse 15 and through about 18. It says, if you are drawn away, your heart is drawn away, and you worship these gods by serving them. By serving them. They tell you don't keep Yahweh's Sabbath at his house. All the people who are not keeping his Sabbath at his house are worshiping Satan the devil. They're serving her. All of them that are not keeping the feast days 3 times a year, you're serving Satan the devil. You're not serving Yahweh, you're worshiping Satan. That's how you worship. By disobeying Yahweh, by following the gods. And they worship the dragon, which gave power to the beast, and they worship the beast, saying, who is like the beast, who can make war with him? Yes, this is a war machine. His hands is on the neck of all of his enemies. And there was given unto him a mouth, speaking great things and blasphemies. Power was given unto him to make war 42 moons. We've been through part of that war already. We're still on trial in heaven. Yeshua is standing at our side, and he's saying, you're the one that's guilty, Satan. Dave and I were talking about that trial going on. I think 100 sermons could be taught on that very subject right there. Satan standing at my right hand opposing me, and Yeshua defending me and saying, House of Yahweh, no, it's you, Satan, that needs to be rebuked. It's not these people. It came to me that a judge told a man in his ear while he was crying, the judge was crying, told a man in his ear while he was crying, hugging this man's neck because he was a House of Yahweh member, and this judge was saying, I'm really sorry the way that we have treated you people. And then he said, I want to assure you it will never happen again. Well, you're going to see more and more of this because there's a huge gathering going to take place that you're involved in. But this war that's going on and the trials in heaven, they haven't stopped yet. Satan is still opposing us. We are opposing Babylon, and Satan is fighting back, of course, but she's limited now. She would kill us if she could, and that's why she, under deception, she pulled the 12 tribes out and starting them under kings to start warring and killing everyone. Well, I'll get back to that. But anyway, blasphemy. They blasphemed against Yahweh. And, of course, the King James Version translated this to the Lord, or to the El, to the bull, to the bull BS, and the great bull that came out of the fire with Aaron, and so forth. It's funny, but today's April Fool, isn't it? So, April Fools. April Fools. They're following the foolishness of their gods. Well, this bull, this calf, this golden calf that just happened to come out a golden calf, yeah, this is your God. We don't know what occurred to Moshe. 40 days, that's all it took, 40 days. Yahweh showed a great lesson right there, how easily these people, when the righteous is taken away from them, when the righteous priest is taken away. He shows that that won't occur to this last house. But when the righteous are taken away, no one notices it. But they start going downhill. And just 40 days turn back to God worship of Egypt. Easter, Halloween, it's all mentioned in your Bible. Christmas, all of that is mentioned in your Bible, also in history. You get a lot from the dictionaries, but the dictionaries is full of this. That's some of the earlier dictionaries that the Catholic Church don't own. The Catholic Church just bought something this week. I forgot what it was. Anyway, I used to sell the Britannica Encyclopedia along with Hertel Blue Ribbon Bible. They bought the Hertel Blue Ribbon Bible years ago. I sold it about 50 years ago, something like that, and maybe 60. But those copies with the center reference are long gone. The first thing they did was take that center reference out of that Bible. Now they own it, and I guess it's still for sale. The new ones are. I haven't seen one, but I saw the old ones and I bought them. I sold them to people. I thought in my mind I was bringing forth righteousness. I put it before them. You know, many people had the chance to study their scriptures, but it wouldn't help them. Why? You've got to go to the place, as Shaul said, go to the place that Yahweh chooses on the days that Yahweh makes his presence there through inspiration, and there be inspired to understand these scriptures. Like I'm trying to make crystal clear right now to you so you can see this beastly system. It's not just a single man we're dealing with here. It's an organization that's been in business for many, many years. And they have all the records. They have it computerized now where the knowledge has increased, where they got instant access to different problems and how to solve those problems, which strings to pull, and so forth. The Catholics were the Vatican. They had the top news. They had the top news medias of all times in the Vatican. Then they put together the computer and started using it. And they have computers in Brussels, Belgium, that is linked to the Vatican, to where they have access to everything they want. And every improvement is put into it. This is how complicated the system is, and they're geared to bring this, Satan's evil, like sodomy, they're geared right now to pushing that into all countries. They want it acceptable, and they want to push out all forms of holiness. That's their job. Our job is to say, don't let them deceive you. That's the scripture. Don't let these people deceive you. He who practices righteousness will receive the reward. The others will not. None of these will. In fact, they're getting ready to wipe themselves out, as was prophesied way back in Isaiah and also in Deuteronomy. Okay, blaspheme the name Yahweh, blaspheme his name, Yahweh, and his house, and those who dwell in heaven. And it was given unto him to make war with the saints and to overcome them. Those who dwell in heaven, brethren, that is us. I've tried to make this clear. You're on the sea of glass right now. All of you are. Everybody that's sitting here in this room is also sitting on that sea of glass right in front of Yahweh's eyes. He knows your every move, your every scratching of your nose, your blinking of your eyes. Not one hair will fall from your head without him knowing it. Remember what Yeshua said? It falls on the sea of glass right there in front of him. He knows everything that's taken place with you. Those who dwell in heaven. And it was given unto him to make war with the saints. This word saint here is someone who practices some form of righteousness. Now that's what this word represents. Those who practice some form of righteousness, which the people that they're going after right now, the people that they're starving to death right now. It's beyond me why these people weren't raising their own food when they have to import everything they get. And yet they got a rich country with plenty of rainfall that can grow trees 100 foot high, but yet they can't farm. Why? Anyway, it's a great question. And it was given unto him to make war with the saints and to overcome them, and authority was given unto him over all tribes, peoples, languages, and nations. You really need to believe that right there. The authority is given unto him over all tribes, peoples, languages, all nations. He's got his hand on the neck of every enemy, all of his enemies. That's the Vatican. And all who dwell upon the earth will worship him, whose names are not written in from the foundation of the world in the book of life of the Lamb. Those, Yahweh says, speaking of Yada, and I'll get deeper into this, but Yahweh said, I will have mercy. That's what King James Version is, not mercy. I'll get to that later. On Yada, from which he brought forth Yeshua, from which he brought forth this work, the branch that builds the house of Yahweh. I'll have mercy on him. That's the King James Version. I'll go deeper into it later. But that's all you need right now. Just remember that. I'll take this tribe, Yada, and that's where I'm going to bring forth my son, the branch, and the last days house of Yahweh in the nation, a Babylonian land not yet established. That was true when Revelations is being written. The Americas were not established until much later. They weren't even written down as discovered until 1492 AY. Now, here we see the United States now in action. Get this. The United States is one with two horns. Christianity and, of course, Catholicism, which is Christianity, which came from Egypt, from which Christianity, the Copts, Christianity got its start. There. I can prove that. I got proof, and I hope to bring out this feast. I'm surely thinking I'm going to try really hard. And I saw another beast coming up out of the earth, and he had two horns. The other came up out of the sea, where there's multitudes, nations, and tongues. The United States, listen to me now, the United States came up where there was no multitudes, nations, and tongues. That's the only one that fits this. That's where Yahweh prophesied the ends of the earth would be, from which I would draw the branch. The man called the branch earth, and he had two horns like a lamb, both like a lamb. They go in by peace, they destroy many. Remember what Daniel said in chapter 8 of Daniel? By peace he will destroy many. But he spoke like a dragon, and that's what we see in the United States today. More so with the present president, that they're trying to change his mind to where he will be in unity with the Pope, and the Pope is saying we've got to have unity. I brought you that last week. They recognize they've got to have unity out of all these nations, or this won't work. And this is what the Pope is telling the people. And he's saying, you're going to die, one of these four horns is going to die if it don't change its mind and get in action with the Vatican. That's simple. The EU is going to die, which is a member of the quartet. If you don't get in action with us, you're going to die. That's the message going forth to them by the Vatican. And he exercised all the authority of the first beast. This is the United States exercising this authority of the Roman Empire. And before him, and caused the earth and those who dwell in it to worship the first beast. Worship. That's serve. The first beast with money and with sodomy, fornication, bestiality, adultery. Serve. When you commit those sins, you know, we started practicing getting away from that when we were at the sanctuary on TNP Lane. I saw it. It sickened me. I said, man, we've got to do something about this. I started bringing hellfire and brimstone sermons. And it did quell some of it, but not all. I rejoiced today, and I think everybody else did with me, on that stage when we separated the men and women. Praise Yahweh. Others followed us in this. When we saw this, when they saw what we were doing, they did it themselves in schools, and they said it worked 10 times better, and the people could get their lessons and their grades and so forth. Well, I've been fighting it ever since. I think we're getting close. Maybe not everyone, but I feel sorry for those who won't come out of the world with me. I can't help you once this is over. And he does great things, verse 13. He does great things, great wonders, so that he makes fire come down from heaven. Here's your nuclear bomb spoken of in Matthew 24, verse 29. Makes fire come down from heaven to devour those on the earth. In 1 hour, this is all going to come to an end, as prophesied in Revelations 18. In the time of the great gathering, this is going to take place. And he deceived those who dwell upon the earth. Deceived, yes, deception. They following gods. God did this. The Lord did this for me. The God. They make out like they're worshiping one God, when in actual fact they're worshiping all the gods, just like the Coptics did in Egypt. They're doing it today from Vatican Hill, and they're doing it through Christianity. Christianity's doing the same thing. And now they've submitted to 3 gods, God the Father, God the Son, God the Holy Ghost. Plus, Yahweh said, if you will believe this, they had more gods than they had cities. Speaking of Yada, who Yahweh said he was going to make a great nation, a tremendous beast, as Daniel called it, and that's what we're reading about right here. These 2 chapters deal with the quartet that came from the quartet spoken of in Daniel. And deceived those. Now Daniel spoke in the year 600 to 500 BY. The Coptic Catholic Romans started, they had trace of them, about 700, which is about 100 years before Daniel. And they then were building a great army. And Daniel said, you're going to be the king of the whole world now. Speaking to Nebuchadnezzar. You're going to be the king of the whole world. This great army you're doing here, putting together, is going to rule the world. And it did for a short time, to show, to prove to heaven and earth what they would do when the reins were loosed and they could do what they wanted to do, with nothing interfering, not even the Book of Yahweh. Well, that's what that lesson to you. You should be gaining from these lessons that's shown in the Holy Scripture. If righteousness, if the righteous priest is taken away, this is what takes place. Well, the righteous priest was taken away. The disciples wrote the rest of the Book of Yahweh. Yahweh preserved it for us, or it wouldn't be here. And then at a certain time, a wound, this great beast was wounded, allowing this Book of Yahweh to come back into action in 1987, just for the perfect time period. And those numbers are all going to be brought out during the feast, showing what they mean, the gematria of those different things that took place is going to be brought out, where you can actually see from the numbers the actions that actually took place. And we lived it right here in the house of Yahweh. And deceived those who dwell upon the earth by those acts of power which he had authority from Satan to do. It's not from Yahweh. Yahweh allows it, as again showing, proving to heaven and earth what this way is of God worship, of his former sons, of Satan who's leading those former sons, the leader of them, what will take place when that is left alone. And when you become priests, brethren, in the kingdom of Yahweh, and you have rulership in the nations, all of these things are going to have to be remembered, and you're going to have to stand firm and fast, not let anything disturb you. Keep your eye on the goal that Yahweh has brought us to at this time. It's going to go on forever. Guard and keep this way throughout all eternity, throughout the universe, the vast universe that we see before us right now. Give authority in the sight of the beast, saying to those who dwell upon the earth that they should make a likeness. We should be like the first beast. Keep Sunday instead of the seventh-day Sabbath. Keep Christmas, Halloween, and Easter, all of those things that was condemned by Yahweh's prophets, by the great prophet Samuel, that was condemned by the great prophet Abel, the great prophet Noah, all condemned these acts of God worship that's going on now in the Vatican. But this, they're following the Vatican, and the Vatican has its ways of controlling the schools. When America was discovered, they went hunting those tribes that was sent out, just like the Roman army did in the first world. Armies were sent out hunting those people that had settlements here and there. They said, move to this location. We have a school there. Those who went lived. Those who didn't go died. They killed them. They took their children to the places and put them in orphanage homes and put them in the schools. The schools that was built by Catholics, run by Catholics, but paid for with government taxes, and still being paid for by government taxes. Yes, their tribute is still being paid, even by the great United States governments. Likeness of the beast, which had the wound by the sword and did live. And he had power to give life to the likeness of the beast, that the likeness of the beast should speak and cause, speak and cause, that as many as would not worship the likeness of the beast should be killed. That's from the beginning. That's the way of Cain. Those that won't submit will be killed. That's the way it was with the Cush system, school system. Those who, they terrorized the world, just as they did the United States before it became the United States, and still terrorizing the people. There's a film, it was brought to me this week, and I'd never seen it, but it was news showing what we suffered and what the judge was crying about and apologizing for. I thanked the man myself. I said, thank you, I appreciate it. You know, that's putting me way up there, $10 million bond. But anyway, the cause, he speaks and he causes them to be killed. That is what they want to do. And that's what they wanted to do to us. They wanted to kill us, like they did David Koresh. Well, this film that was sent to me, it's a great one. I want you to all see it, because they show the war that we were fighting, the hell that I was going through, fighting my way through, with Yahweh saying, when you walk through the fire, I'm going to be there with you. Don't worry. Well, he was. We're still here. We walked through the fire, and we're still here. We didn't get burned. We got uplifted for all the world to see. All over the world. This was the world's greatest news. There was hundreds of people, maybe even thousands, wanting interviews from the House of Yahweh. Well, this was showing all of it, and they had this great burning behind me in this picture of the David Koresh, and he kept comparing me to David Koresh. He showed some pictures there of me, supposed to have been of me. They wasn't me. It was my brother. He didn't know it, though. But you know, it's mixed with lies, all the truth, you know, a little bit of truth and a lot of lies. But I want all of you to see it, and we're going to try to set it up where we can get it showed during the feast for everyone. But we have walked through the fire, and they showed it in the background. Verse 16 now. And he causes all, both small and great, rich and poor, free and bond, that they should give to themselves a mark upon their right hand and their forehead. That is, this mark of the sixth day, the Sunday worship, instead of Yahweh worship, on your forehead and your hand. Cease from doing your work with your hand. Work for Yahweh on the seventh day. That is a wonderful, wonderful service to your brothers and sisters. And that no one might buy or sell unless they have this mark of the beast. Now, I think this rope is continually tightened, twisted a little more every day. They're trying to get that power. It's the last thing they do here. Notice that you can't buy or sell. And you're seeing this more and more. In North Carolina is a great example there. They were losing billions of dollars. They started pulling them out. The Vatican says, take them jobs out of there. And they started taking them out. And of course, they said, well, let's accept the sin instead. If you can't beat them, join them. That's the motto. Well, here is wisdom. Let him that has understanding count the number of the beast, for it is the number of a man, and that number is 666. 666. Well, in the mark of the beast, I show you that number, along with the computer, the increase in knowledge, and so forth. What they are demanding here is what I showed you last week. Right there is 27 nations. Here is Merkel, if you can see her, standing right behind the Pope. Right here. You're going to see more out of her this week. She's got a message to tell. And the word here is unity. Unity. With European Union, all these 27 nations, and look here at the world leaders and the Pope giving his message straight from the Vatican. Well, of course, that's what's taking place in today's news. If you look at chapter 6 now, you see what this beast here, how he's describing this beast. He shows us in chapter 6 what this quartet does. and one of them is hunger. You really need to read that. A third of the people is killed by the hunger, thirst, and, of course, war and fighting. In verse 8, the fourth part of the earth is killed with the sword, that's war, with hunger, that's famine. That's what we're seeing right now. People, they're actually starving them to death. They're literally starving them to death. It's amazing what they were set up to do, and no telling how long the plans have been. You get a person hooked. Food stamps is one of those ways. That's a great way to get a person hooked. And people don't want to do without them. Once you get hooked on them, it's a gift. And of course, you get hooked on it, you don't want to give it up. These people, they said, why are you raising your own crops? What's it costing you? Look at the work you're having to do. Well, to me, farming was an enjoyment. It wasn't really something that I hated. And even today, if you look, we've got, we're picking about 18 to 22 sacks of vegetables every day from mulch. We got some gardeners in the House of Yahweh, and every time I look at them, they have a smile on their face. But anyway, now get this picture. Here are these people. They were taking care of themselves. They were multiplying. They were. I remember Herman L. Hay and Rod Meredith. These are some of my earlier friends from 50 years ago, or 60, 70, somewhere in there, telling me that the most joyous people they'd ever seen was when they went to these nations that are starving to death right now. They went there and were sent there to visit and see what they could do. And they said those people were the most joyous people they'd ever seen in their life. And they were actually singing songs while they're chopping weeds out of the garden and so forth. Now that was people who were farming. Okay, they came in, the Catholic Church. Another one was the Philippines, the people were taken care of by dough. Well, there was another one, Del Monte, pineapple, and they, from the cradle to the grave, they were taken care of, but they were not paid union wages. The Catholic Church moves in and said, sign this, and you can get all this money. Well, these two companies said, we can't pay this, we'll have to move it to another location. Well, they moved to another location. These people went hungry. And that's how the Catholic Church was able to take that over completely. And now the president there is saying, the Catholic Church does nothing for us. They come in here and they get our money and they take it back to the Vatican. I just read you that article not too long ago. Well, that's the way they have done on everything else. They have got hooks into each country, and they did in Africa, and they said, we can sell these vegetables and this corn and wheat and everything. We can sell it to you for pennies for what you're spending now to buy seed. They made it to where they hooked them on it. Now, this went on for years, but they had them set up to where when they shut it off, they would start starving to death because they had no instruments to farm with anymore. They gave that up. Well, why do this? We can go out and play around and have fun. And that's exactly what took place. This is the tentacles that they reach out and get you with. Well, in chapter 6 and chapter 7, we see the quartet in action here and exactly what it would do. We see the one given the crown here, the Roman Catholic Church that has authority. We also see the Lamb opening the seals for its house, the House of Yahweh, working with the House of Yahweh to reveal all of these things to those who will come here and be in unity with the House of Yahweh. Or you can be in unity with the gods and receive no promises at all from Yahweh. You know, you shut yourself off from Yahweh. You can say, I love the House of Yahweh. I want to stay in it forever. That's what I said. I wrote the song, in fact. But now you're going to have to sing it. The unity with Yahweh, it's not just when you say House of Yahweh. It's not, well, I'll take what I like out of the House of Yahweh. No, you can't do that. You've got to set it up. You've got to take everything, like Yahweh said, the one I'm going to give this to, who will I teach knowledge? He says he's going to build my house. It'll have complete understanding, complete wisdom taught to it. That's what it says. It's what your Book of Yahweh says, is brought out by the great Kohan Shaul today. You've got to take the whole thing. The House of Yahweh means the whole House of Yahweh, nothing else. When you accept Satan worship, you cut yourself off from Yahweh, and you're listed as those fit for destruction. Only fit for destruction. As the apostle said, like brute beasts that are to be killed. Well, that's what Satan has in store, and we'll get deeper into that. It goes deep, brother, and it goes deep, but you can understand it if you'll try to remember these things that are brought out about each thing and see how Yahweh from the beginning was the plan. And he showed it all the way through. Nobody's ever understood it before. No, nobody. No one. Yeshua taught pieces of it. When he was on earth, he taught pieces and bits of it, but not complete like it's being taught today. You're going to see the complete thing, and hopefully this feast. May Yahweh bless you, and I'll turn the services back to the next leader. I love you.